Right now, in a Malawi health post, a mother is receiving treatment for complications related to childbirth. Complications that might have been fatal had she not been able to reach the facility.
Today, there are 7.5 billion people in the world. Over 50% are connected to the internet. We are still leaving 3.5 billion who cannot be reached with basic supplies or medicines or educational services.
There are 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, a collective call to action to address our greatest global challenges. If we can come together to use existing technology and the data it generates more effectively, the SDGs are achievable and a better world will be possible. DIAL's mission is to help governments and others in the development sector leverage technology to improve the delivery of services to those who need them most.
Governments, the development community, and the private sector, are all in different ways working to increase digital inclusion in the world. So I think there is an important job that we play in bringing together all these actors.
In countries around the world, the same technology channels and data that can be used to deliver a message or locate the nearest healthcare post can also help farmers sell their crops or a student attend a local school.
We have been working on a food security monitoring data model in Uganda.
Governments recognize that technology has the potential to solve multiple societal problems, deliver a health message, a payment, or local school information. But they often don't know where to start to make that happen. It requires a new approach.
Really is promoting a whole-of-government approach to doing that analysis ahead of time so that you can simplify your architecture, achieve economies of scale, and make it easier to deploy, support, and maintain.
By taking this approach, country governments will be able to streamline engagement with citizens and improve the delivery of services to them. The Principles for Digital Development, which is stewarded by DIAL, can also help provide guidance to both governments and citizens on the responsible use of technology and to improve digital literacy efforts.
Everything that we do is really based on what the community tells us they want and what they need, whether that's in terms of knowledge products, resources, tools that they can use to better understand and implement the principles into their work. We try to listen to what they want, and then from there we develop.
DIAL brings together relevant stakeholders to leverage the power of existing technology, improving the way decisions are made.
We do kind of sit at the nexus of products, people, pricing, and policy. We can actually help connect the dots where some people don't see this.
There are now more than 5 billion people using mobile phones in the world. Phones can now be used to communicate valuable information during times of humanitarian crisis. Phones can also be used to collect valuable data during times of disease spread. And phones can also be used to connect people to jobs, to services, and to valuable capital, which will help them to escape from poverty.
We're simply trying to make sure that we can democratize that technology so anyone, anywhere, at any time could use it.
The impact of DIAL's work can be seen in the field, bringing the public and private sectors together in countries like Malawi, Tanzania, and Uganda to solve common problems and unlock the power of digital solutions and mobile phone data to advance development. DIAL is housed in the United Nations Foundation, providing the ability to coordinate and cooperate with UN-level systems in a way that few organizations can match.
Having inclusive digital societies is something that we should all benefit from. I just believe that in developing countries, that needs to be the case too. We believe that technology is an underpinning element to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and so DIAL also really clearly within its mandate is focused on that issue.
We are part of a digital ecosystem that's doing fantastic work. We can do more though, to more effectively pool our effort and our work so that we can tackle bigger challenges together.
We're ensuring that governments can deliver services to the people that need the most.
I think over time, you'll start to see the whole ecosystem reshape itself so that really the power and the decisions rest with the governments that are elected by the people that we're currently trying to serve.
The next 5 years, I think, is going to be actually really pivotal in terms of not only achieving or making progress against the SDGs, but just in the digital transformation of the entire world. And I do believe that a rising tide lifts all boats.
Because what we're all working towards is a world in which the SDGs are achieved. For all of us as human beings, we need to ensure that we all have an equal shot at achieving our dreams.
We ended 2019 with excitement and expectation. Together, the Global Fund Partnership saved 6 million lives in 2019 alone. More people were receiving life-saving treatment for HIV, TB, and malaria than ever before. Then the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and everything changed. In addition to the direct deaths from COVID, the knock-on impact on the fight against HIV, TB, and malaria is potentially catastrophic. Many life-saving services have been cancelled or postponed. Studies predict deaths from HIV, TB, and malaria could as much as double in the next year as a knock-on result of COVID-19, wiping out a decade or more of progress. We cannot let that happen. We have fought too hard and for too long to let that progress be destroyed by COVID-19. We must act with speed and at scale, investing far greater resources than have yet been committed. The stakes are extraordinarily high. In 2020, we could lose all we have achieved in the past decade. We must unite to fight.
As a payments leader, Visa is extending the boundaries of our network and the potential of billions of connected devices, bringing the security and reliability of our brand to customers across the entire payments ecosystem. Digital commerce can extend to even the most remote regions, where people who don't typically bank can access the benefits of mobile technology. Despite the growth of digital payments, about 1.7 billion people still lack access to formal financial services, and consumers spend $18 trillion in cash and checks. Meeting this opportunity is the mission of Visa's nearly 20,000 employees, committed to accelerating the global migration to digital payments to enable individuals, businesses, and economies to thrive.
We think of a smart city as a city that is using technology to improve the lives of its citizens.
Rubicon's a technology company born in the waste and recycling space, and we're a certified B Corp, meaning that we do our business for the purpose of doing good. In comes Rubicon with a different set of incentives, everything with an orientation towards ending waste. And over time, it's grown to mean, how else can we end waste? Wasted time, wasted energy, wasted tax dollars. And that's where our smart city product really comes into play.
We define a smart city as a city that is able to use technology to move from being a reactive city to one that is proactively providing services, using technology to improve the lives of its citizens.
At a very high level, it helps city governments and fleets operate more efficiently and effectively.
Our technology helps cities turn their waste and recycling vehicles into mobile data collection assets. These vehicles can collect other data using artificial intelligence and machine learning to detect other items throughout the city. As the garbage truck does its normal day-to-day route, it can also be looking for things like potholes, graffiti hotspots, or vacant homes, or road conditions.
They can help city leaders learn about their communities and how can cities proactively address those concerns before they become real problems. To us, that's what a smart city is all about.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody all over the world, and welcome to Day 2 of the 2020 Concordia Annual Summit. My name is Kevin Wenzel, the Director of Global Programming for Concordia, and your summit host this year. If you joined us yesterday, welcome back, and if you're joining us for the first time, welcome to the platform. You know, a few notes about this platform as we get ready for today. We've noticed that a lot of people have started figuring out the different features on it, but there's a lot of different pieces to it that we want to make sure you're all aware of so that you can take the most advantage of your summit experience. The first is we want to have a little fun with you, and we've included a gamification feature that you may not have been able to see yet. It's called Summit Challenges, and you'll see it on the main menu. Every day, we're going to be giving away a 1-year individual global membership valued at $2,500, a set of Concordia Americas passes, a set of Concordia Africa passes, and 20% off individual membership for the top leaders of that day for interaction through the Summit Challenges features. If you go in there, you'll see everything you need to do to earn points, including chatting with fellow attendees, adding to discussion feeds, and engaging in one of our community discussions. So congratulations to today's winner of a one-year individual Concordia membership, Zhao Banjaki, CEO of the Business Incubation and Development Center in Guinea-Bissau. We'll be messaging all of our winners directly each day. The second thing I want you to take a minute to notice is the discussion feed for this main stage session. It should be right to the right of the main stage on your browser window. You know, we want to hear from you during these discussions, and the discussion feed is the perfect place for you to share your opinions, which I know a lot of you have a lot of, share related projects you might be working on or looking to connect with people, and pose questions to each other. This is an opportunity for us to try to have an experience of having organic conversations like in person, and we really encourage you to post there and interact with your fellow guests. With that, we are going to get right on it and start with our first conversation for today as part of our Global Finance and Trade programming this morning. We will host a conversation around the power of social impact investments for a sustainable future in partnership with the Global Citizen Forum. So I'm pleased to welcome to Concordia, Amina Mohammed, Minister of Sports, Heritage and Culture for the Republic of Kenya, Nouriel Roubini, economist and chairman of Roubini Macro Associates LLC, His Excellency Timothy Harris, Prime Minister of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, and our moderator, Armand Artin, President of Artin Capital. Armand?
Thank you. Thank you for having us, and it is a great pleasure. And with a little sadness that we're not all gathered in New York in this crazy week, which normally puts us all together in the middle of the world. But again, delighted to have friends. I can call friends, Amina, Nouriel, Prime Minister. We know each other for years, and we have this great opportunity to speak from every part of the world where we are sitting right now. For those who doesn't know myself and the Global Citizen Forum, it is a social action platform built on the shared belief in global citizenship as a cultural, moral, and institutional framework for the generations to come. As part of the governance agenda of the Global Citizen Forum, we closely promote global governance, multilateralism, and public-private partnership. This is why we have put together our efforts with Concordia, because we strongly believe that the support of achievement of the SDGs are crucial, and the social impact investment have a very special place. We live in a very difficult year where mobility is at probably an all-time low for our generation for the last 25 years. And this has impact on many states around the world. We have with us Nouriel, as you all know, has incredible depth and analysis of how this economic impact will play for big countries, small countries, developing nations. And I will first ask him to please comment his perception on the importance and role of social impact for small islands and developing nations from your perspective, Nouriel.
Thank you very much. A great honor and pleasure to be with all of you in this very distinguished panel. I would like to speak about how social impact investment, foreign direct investment, and citizenship by investment programs can help to foster economic prosperity and growth in smaller states, including small island economies. But I'll briefly talk about how this COVID crisis first has affected broadly emerging markets, zoom in about these smaller economies. First of all, this crisis hit the entire global economy, but especially emerging markets and developing frontier economies and smaller island states. There has been a recent spike of cases of COVID in many emerging markets, from Central Latin America to parts of Africa, to Middle East, even to parts of Asia. In each case, initially there was an early strong lockdowns, but then given the economic damage from the lockdown, there was a pressure for early reopening that have now led to a spike in new cases. Unfortunately, compared to advanced economies, emerging markets have weaker and poorer healthcare systems, the more density of population in urban areas, more co-living of large households in small cramped homes, migrant workers that also may be living in cohabitation. And of course, that leads to the risk of greater contagion. Emerging markets also have more limited policy response in terms of monetary and fiscal policy that cannot be stimulated as easy. Many of them have foreign currency or dollar debt and less access to dollar liquidity. The IMF, the World Bank, and the G20 have suspended some debt payments for some of the poorer indebted countries, but private sector creditors have not done so. But IMF and World Bank borrowing and private borrowing can be quite expensive. And even Chinese foreign direct investment may come at restricted, if not coercive terms, like conversion of debt into equity. In this smaller economy, devaluing your currency doesn't help you very much because you have dollar debt, because it raises the cost of your imports, and many of your exports are priced in euro and dollar, so you don't regain competitiveness. These countries have had negative terms of trade shocks given the fall or collapse of commodity prices like oil, industrial metal, agricultural goods, etc. Many of these emerging markets rely a lot on foreign tourism that has also collapsed, on remittances from their own migrants to other countries that are now losing jobs. So those are additional shocks. And of course, in many countries, global climate change puts at risk many of these emerging markets. You have, in the short term, hurricanes, typhoons, or droughts and fires. And medium term, there is a risk of massive long-term flooding of coastal areas, an entire country or island risking to go underwater for good. We've also discovered that global pandemics can be related to global climate change. The zoonotic transmission from animal and human derives in part from the fact that we're destroying ecosystem of wild animals that become then closer in contact with livestock and with human beings. And of course, now we have a risk of economic, financial, social, and political instability and unrest, given the increase in inequality and poverty that is rising. Some countries are near bankrupt and restructure their foreign debts, like Argentina and Ecuador. Lebanon has defaulted on its foreign debt. Many countries in sub-Saharan Africa are also in financial distress. So there has to be an alternative that provides economic opportunity, welfare, and prosperity. And this alternative for many smaller emerging market and frontier economies, including small islands, is a combination of social impact investing, of foreign direct investment, and of citizenship by investment program. As these island economies and smaller economies seek to improve their incomes, FDI that is emerging from these CIPs can prove to offer the funding and the support that they need to survive, thrive, and diversify their own economies. Social impact investment from CIP-based FDI brings financial capital, managerial capital, human capital, and skills, and can be invested in sustainable and impact investing sectors. The benefit of this CIP and impact investment goes beyond the initial investment of foreign capital. It includes follow-on investment, increased spending in the country by the families and the people that move there, bringing more diverse talent and entrepreneurship to grow these economies and small islands. And of course, success stories with CIP and FDI include Cyprus in real estate and tourism, Portugal, Vancouver, look what happened in Canada and Vancouver, countries like Hungary, St. Kitts and Nevis, transformation from sugar, tourism, and other activities, and other countries like Malta. Now, some of these funds can be used to retire high interest rate debt from IMF, World Bank, and private investors. They can be used to develop sovereign wealth funds that can be used when there is a natural disaster or an economic shock. For example, social impact bonds that go with zero interest rate because the investors benefit from citizenship can be used either to refinance or repay high interest debt or to finance impact FDI. And of course, the social impact investments include sectors such as renewable energy investments like solar and wind, available to many of these countries, infrastructures like airports, roads, ports, schools, hospitals. You can develop digital infrastructure and technological innovation to provide digital services, both private and public sector ones, and we are going direction of a knowledge economy. You can develop sustainable and ecological tourism that prevents overfishing. You can have sustainable and green real estate. And of course, you can have also provision of educational services like the new University of the West Indies campus that is financed through some of these CIPs. If you think about it, social impact investment and FDI supported by CIP develops both education and labor force skills at the local level, cultural growth, diversification of these economies that is important to achieve economic resilience, ability to adapt and to mitigate global climate change, provide job creation in labor-intensive areas such as infrastructure and real estate, provide financial independence, and of course, provide necessary government revenues that are necessary for economic growth. So in conclusion, we may be in a new era of global citizenship and related social impact foreign direct investment that will help saving allied nations and other smaller economies that face fragilities and provide them a framework that is needed for long-term economic growth, prosperity, inclusive growth, and sustainability. So I'm all in favor of these types of programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nouriel. And absolutely, some of the elements you mentioned of benefit are actually a reality of Prime Minister Harris' life in the last 10 years, where he had used this opportunity to diversify the economy of his country, has gone through the hurricanes that affected all Caribbeans and his island 3 years ago. So without delay, Prime Minister Harris, tell us a little bit real life success stories from how St. Kitts have been successful model around the world of benefiting and utilizing this citizenship by investment, social impact investment to completely transform the life of Kittitians.
Thank you very much. I was intrigued when Nouriel spoke to the alternative path to keep economies alive, provide opportunities for people all over the world. In fact, when in 1984, all those before us envisaged an increasing space for St. Kitts and Nevis as the smallest country in the hemisphere, one of the options that came forward was the Citizenship by Investment Program. There it was hoped that we could enlarge our space, enlarge the available pool of resources available to assist St. Kitts and Nevis as a new sovereign state to advance the opportunities for our people to do well. The Citizenship by Investment Program, which we legislated in 1984, is the model of investment programs all over the world. It is the oldest and the best CBI program, and we are working hard to maintain the platinum brand. Clearly, the COVID-19 pandemic has turned the world upside down and has created enormous challenges for people everywhere, from unemployment, the overwhelming of health sectors all over the world. We see what is happening, the lockdowns, now and off and on in some of the most advanced countries. We are at a very dangerous spot. And had it not been for the CBI program, if for St. Kitts and Nevis at this particular moment in time, we would not have been able to respond as successfully as we have with respect to COVID-19. The situation with respect to COVID-19 is that St. Kitts and Nevis has emerged as the model of a well-managed state with respect to COVID-19. We were the last country, as it were, to have experienced a COVID case, and that was because very early we responded in the right way closing our borders, putting in place quarantine facilities, isolation centers, and we were able to move at a rapid rate to safeguard our country from the importation of the virus. But as we close our borders, it meant our tourism industry, which was one of the most significant economic driver, that industry literally collapsed. Thousands of people were put on the job line. We were literally out of work, and we had to respond. We had to respond to what was now indigent poverty creeping into the country. And by and large, our response came. We were able to put just under 50 million US dollars in support to our people directly affected by the pandemic and give them an opportunity, as it were, to breathe again, an opportunity to keep their heads above the water at a very difficult time. Most of that resources, of course, came because we were able to build up our fiscal buffers through the significant performance of our CBI program. So when we begin to speak about the social impact, we live that. We understand without the CBI program contributing to our revenues, contributing to our economic growth, the country would be in a very difficult spot. Indeed, when COVID-19 impacted the Caribbean islands and St. Kitts and Nevis in particular, we had one of the strongest fiscal buffers anywhere in the hemisphere. We were doing very well among all our peers within the region, with one of the highest per capita GDP, to the extent that we could use that as a gauge internationally of how well we were doing. The CBI program helped to strengthen our economic framework, allow us to be able to attract brand name hotel facilities, such as the Four Seasons, such as the world-renowned Park Hyatt brand that had come to St. Kitts, such as the Ramada hotels. And with hotels come jobs. And so we were in a very, I would say, very commendable spot in terms of our engagement, in terms of our ability to provide livelihoods to our people. COVID-19, of course, has disrupted that order. Nonetheless, we continue to bring innovative programs to bear to advance the economic space internationally in which we are engaged. We have launched a limited time offer program under the CBI program, intended to help us garner additional support in the tremendous fight we must have against COVID-19. COVID-19 is coming at a terrible time, a time when we also have to grapple with the challenges of climate change and all the adverse impact that could have and does have on the economies of small island states. Every year we wonder, will we have to build back over again? Will our homes be destroyed? Will our economic infrastructure be lost as we suffer the consequence of Category 5 hurricanes upon the small island states in the region? And so clearly the planetary health is at a difficult spot and it needs global leadership. And what we would require is that those international institutions bring a greater comprehension and sensitivity to the vulnerability of small island states. When a hurricane is hitting Florida, you could perhaps evacuate from one city to another. When a hurricane is striking St. Kitts and Nevis, we are too small, nowhere else to go. And so size does matter, and size requires special consideration, whether in the context of the WTO, where our trade relationship may be deemed insignificant, or in the context of a need for concessionary support from institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF. There's a need for rethinking, and there's a need again for global leadership. The CBI program for St. Nevis and for others is critically important to the stability of our society and economies.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and very well put words in, as I said, a reality check of how this has been exercised and lived by 1,000 citizens, not only words. Without further delay, dear Amina, who is presently Minister of Culture and Sports in Kenya, but I think your future role as Director General of the WTO is more valuable in this conversation, where we really want to know how you think this organization can reshape the future of trade for countries like St. Kitts or other developing emerging markets. What would you do different to make a difference? Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much. First of all, let me just say that I have truly enjoyed listening to His Excellency the Prime Minister, as well as to Dr. Nuriel. I believe that there's really not much that I'm going to add, except to say that in fact it's true that tourism, which was the mainstay, I think, of many of our countries, was affected disproportionately by the COVID-19 pandemic. And therefore, it's extremely important that as we move forward, that we actually start to develop different, programs, different social impact investment programs. And I'm really intrigued by the CBI. Because, as His Excellency the Prime Minister has said, it has delivered for St. Kitts and Nevis. And so that's really a model that many of our countries should probably be looking at. But it's also very true that one size doesn't fit all, and that we will need to devise different and develop different programs for different parts of the world with different, demands on our economies. The pandemic has had such a devastating, impact on even just the international, supply and value chains. They've been totally disrupted, and so to just rebuild those, we must find, different investment vehicles, if you like, to just ensure that we can, rebuild, reconstruct some of these supply lines. And so, so what we've been talking about at the WTO is to make sure that the trade lanes are kept open so that countries get what they need, whether it's medicine equipment, whether it's going to be the ventilators that all of us need, the PPEs, but also the food stock that we need to keep our populations, alive and well. So these are some of the issues that we. How do we make sure?
You really can't tell. And
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank
Sorry
you very,
for
very much.
some
And so,
technical problems to get back. Amina, please.
yeah, so thank you very, very much. And maybe to just say that that in fact the pandemic has intensified the need to support social impact investment. The social and economic needs of populations across the world, as we've just been told, call for investment models that actually consider the business impact on communities in addition to revenue creation. And as a result of the global consumer behavior change driven by the pandemic, social impact investments will be essential to spur innovation. And I think the examples that were given on how CBI can actually plug some of the shortfalls that we have in our economies, and Prime Minister talked about the facilities that were constructed using CBI, the hotels that came up, and basically 5-star and 6-star hotels that attract even more tourists into the country, with all the other demands that tourists have, and in many ways spurring other sectors of the St. Kitts and Nevis economy. And so and for all of us, there are those shortfalls that we realize with the pandemic especially, and that we need to fill up. In my country, for instance, just the disruption in the supply chains, the supply lines. the fact that we cannot export the flowers that we grow as much as we did before. Now we're beginning to export them again, but in the beginning we actually had to give them away as gifts to many countries, to just lift up people's spirits, during the pandemic. Programs like that would actually support the reconstruction of these supply lines as people begin again to invest and to buy some of the products that our countries are producing. So what would I just in conclusion say that we need to create partnerships that respond to the volatility, the unpredictability, the uncertainty, and the ambiguity that's been caused by economic constriction as a result of the pandemic, and broadening this social business interaction to co-produce impacting ideas like the ones we've had talked about, and expanding the financial basis for purpose-driven businesses, and this should happen at all economic tiers of society. We think that will speed up recovery, that it will grant citizens the tools to fashion solutions to emerging social problems, but also to just direct some of the CBI to areas where they're required. Gender, entrepreneurship, women entrepreneurship, for instance. That if in fact we were able to target directly using the CBI, would make the difference that we want to see in our societies, in our communities, but more importantly, in the economy. The majority of people, the populations in our countries, the majority is women, and if those women were supported using such social impact investment programs to basically make the contribution that they must to the social and economic development of their countries, I think we would actually see much better use of the resources that are generated through CBI and other programs, other social impact programs like those. But finally, let me say this, that and especially for countries like ours that are impacted greatly by climate change, we have to move away from the silo approach. Because we use trade rules to govern multilateral trade. And we use a multilateral investment agreement to govern the environment. I don't think with the changes that we see occurring across the world, with the typhoons that the Prime Minister has talked about, that we can continue to actually discuss these things and have frameworks that are not related to each other, that are not connected to each other. I think it's time that we actually began to bring this together to discuss environment and trade, and make sure that the WTO begins to pay attention to trade and climate change, trade and sustainable development, as well as, of course, as I said before, trade and gender. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amina, and I wish that very soon you are in position to make a difference and to implement some of these changes in these important organizations. And as the late Kofi Annan said in the closing of our Global Citizen Forum a couple of years ago, we don't have a choice. If you want to go far, you have to go together. If you want to go fast, you can go alone. And I think this epidemic has showed us how much we're interconnected, and we don't have a choice than going together. Thank you very much for your time, attention, dedication. Be safe. God bless you. And good luck to Concordia for the next panel. Apologies.
Thank you so much, Armand, and to our esteemed panel for that conversation. I mentioned this yesterday that Concordia is a sum of all of its parts, and I think this morning is showing that more than ever with our different sponsors and partner organizations bringing these conversations together. So in that same vein, we are now very pleased to move on to our next conversation around recovering and rebuilding through digital infrastructure, sponsored by Vodafone. I am very pleased to welcome to Concordia Butena Germazi, Director of Digital Development Infrastructure Practice Group at the World Bank, Joseph Mucheru, Kenyan Cabinet Secretary in the Ministry of Information and Communications, and Joachim Reiter, Group External Affairs Director for Vodafone. Joachim?
Thank you very much. And what could be more fitting than us when Concordia has gone digital to try to then tackle the question of how do we make sure that digital becomes a tool that everyone can be empowered by. COVID-19, of course, has brought quite significant challenges and learnings. But one of the learnings have been that all countries, all societies must make digital a mainstream part of their recovery program. Now, the problem with that, and that's not a small task, is obviously the financing gap that still remains for many, many countries. Just to give you a sense, worldwide, we're talking about some 400 billion US dollars missing to close the financing gap to actually make sure that everyone has access to high quality internet. Now, even in rich regions like the European Union, the European Commission has estimated that financing gap is around 42 billion annually that they now need to raise in order to achieve their digital ambitions. And of course, when you look at the UN Broadband Commission and its findings around Africa's digital financing gap, it is very significant in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals with respect to universal access to internet. We're talking about in the area of 109 and 110 billion US dollars. So this is a very, very significant challenge. Yet the learnings from COVID is everyone is more dependent on digital than ever. It has become an essential service for the function of society and for many of the services that people rely on for their everyday life, ranging from education, health, to the way they work and the way that they continue to be active participants in the economy. I am super pleased to have not only good experts, but also thought leaders and very influential individuals in this fireside chat to try to unpack and tackle some of these issues. So it was already referred to, but I have Joseph Mucheru, Cabinet Secretary of the Ministry of ICT, Innovation and Youth Affairs in Kenya. And I also have Bettina Germasi, Director of Digital Development at the World Bank. Over the next 25 minutes or 22 or 3 minutes, we will discuss first the role digital will play in rebuilding our societies and economies post-COVID. Secondly, we will try to unpack what is really behind the digital divide that many African countries and the continent at large is struggling with. And third, we will explore how we can work better together to close this investment gap and close the digital divide for good, which is an objective that the UN Secretary General in his latest report also very much highlighted. So let me first start with a simple question, perhaps, to both of you. In terms of the pandemic, and we're learning how to coexist with the pandemic, it's far from over, but it has already given us some important learnings, but also some perhaps things that have been less positive in terms of our digital readiness and our experience of digital. So when it comes to digital, what would be the one thing that you would like to keep from the past 6 months in terms of our learnings? And what one thing would you leave behind and you would want to never repeat that mistake? And maybe Joseph, I can ask you to start.
Thank you very much, Joachim, for this. And really, it's a great honor to be here on this panel to just discuss on these matters of digital. I think the first thing I would want to keep is the acceptance of technology and digital. For a long time, it was always a hard sell to everybody. Why are we investing in all these cables? Why are we investing in all these networks? What is the value? And people will say, you need to prioritize food, you need to prioritize medicine, and so on. And I think during this pandemic, it's been very clear that because of technology, we've been able to link with the rest of the world and learn about this pandemic. We've been able to contact trace. We've been able to have meetings and converse and still maintain the social distancing and other requirements that the Ministry of Health has told us to do. So I would want to keep that momentum that we have seen and the interest and people wanting to continue to invest. The use of technology now for some of the cybercrime activities, fake news, and so on is the one thing I would want to see thrown out. There's been arguments about what 5G will do, many different things that people have been trying to say over the internet, and they're not always true. So getting rid of that and making sure that people now understand how to use the technology, ensuring that there is safety, and that now we can expand it into all the schools is one thing I would want to keep. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bettina, what was your view on this? You're on mute. Oh, you're still on mute. Let's see. Oh, could you refresh your screen if you can? And while you do that, maybe I'll, Joseph, if I continue with you for the time being, because I actually think it's quite interesting. You come from a tech company. You were building basically Google's presence in Africa, and I work for a sort of a tech company in the sense of a connectivity company that also provides a lot of adjacent services. I completely agree with you on the acceptance of technology, but I also think the tech sector has to become better at telling the human story. It's not tech for the purpose of tech. It's tech for the purpose of the way that it can shape and improve people's lives. And I actually think that's one of, to your point, that's one where you increasingly see other ministries realizing mainstreaming tech or mainstreaming digital is not for the sake of itself. It's actually because the delivery of those services and the way that we actually reach people is far improved. And I think this is something very positive. So my question back to you, Joseph, if you don't mind, is as you're now integral in the formulation of the Kenya's reconstruction program and looking forward, how will you try to leverage exactly your first point around the things you would like to keep? And how do you see then digital becoming mainstreamed into the different departments' priorities?
Let me say that the first thing that has been so clear, our presidents across the continent have actually been meeting digitally, and that has gone down to the cabinet, to the principal secretaries, and so on. Everybody has seen the value of technology. They've seen that you don't have to make long trips and pay a lot of money just to have conversations. So the first thing many ministries have seen is the kind of efficiency that technology has been able to provide. And those that were not ready have really been pushing me and my ministry to ensure that they have the right infrastructure in place and that we're investing with them. They want to learn. We recently launched a digital occurrence book with the police, and this is across the city. And every police officer now has a device, and they can go to people's homes and record, as opposed to the traditional method where you go to the actual police station. So what we found is that now everyone wants to understand, they want to learn, they want to be part of this. They are availing their budgets to make sure that this infrastructure is implemented and it's working. And it's becoming something that I expect will continue post-COVID. And there's an excitement that, people, where they feared so much technology. In fact, they were afraid that, they don't know how they'll do this or do that. They've seen actually it's straightforward, it is easy. You can have a video call like we're having now with people in any part of the world, and it will work. And we've done the same across the whole country. So the infrastructure that we've been investing in now, everybody wants to be part of that. They want to expand it, whether it is e-procurement or any of the other issues. So I expect this is something we will handle and really work together with everyone going forward. Exciting times.
Let me then try. Yeah, let me turn to you, Bettina, because is it working now, your microphone?
I hope. Can you hear
Can
me?
you hear me? Yes, perfect. So
Yes.
what is the positive learning? Yeah. So welcome back. What's the positive learning and also thing you would like to leave behind? And then let me then add the question is, how do you see the role of the IFCs to amplify and drive the positive learnings across the African continent as part of trying to build back better and close the digital divide?
Thank you so much. So I think what we learned clearly is the importance of digital and how this pandemic really shifted the dialogue around digital from why it's important. And as Joseph mentioned, we don't need to make the case anymore. The question now is how do we do it and how do we do it fast? So if we talk about the silver lining under this cloud, I think digital is clearly one. And what we've seen, countries with the right connectivity, with the right policies around how to use data, we've seen sectors being transformed in a matter of weeks. A digital transformation that many countries are trying to push for many years, whether in education or in health or social protection. So a clear examples of the importance of digital in coping with the pandemic, dealing with it, and hopefully recovering as we get to building back and building forward better. I think the main thing that we need to look at clearly is, exactly the objective of the discussion today. How do we make sure that there is equitable access to those tools that are needed for the new normal? And the pandemic showed that both within country but also between countries, the digital divide is there, is crucial, and is really a difficult thing to cope with and to respond to, but extremely urgent. So that's, I think, how the pandemic is helping, I think, raise the importance of the sector in a manner that was not done before. In terms of your next question about, the international finance landscape, I think it is very clear also as same ways we do it with countries, we do it with AFI, an importance of the digital a little bit more than it was before. So we know that the digital part of the economy is moving faster than the traditional part. So in a context of rebuilding better or moving forward, I think a key ingredient of putting digital in how we think about the pandemic. So I think it created a renewed interest on the topic and a renewed reprioritization of it in international organizations.
But could I ask both of you, because I think this is a really, really interesting point that you're making, both of you, in terms of the realization how important it is, but then also the fact that digital becomes almost like the new dividing line. So when we talked about in the past about people having access to education or not, or access to health or not, increasingly that's determined just as much of whether they're digitally literate, whether they have access to the digital devices, and then fundamentally whether the connectivity works. And that's quite a worrisome development, because if digital divide was something that drove just differences in productivity, but not fundamentally differences in basic tenets of equality and a common faith, if you want, of a society, it feels to me that the nerve around the digital divide, not only the positive around digital, but also if we fail this in terms of digital divide, how profound the implications are across a number of the other sort of societal goals, be it kids' education, be it access to medication, healthcare, or other determinants, if you want, of people's well-being beyond their level of productivity in the economy. And for me, that's a quite profound shift. And I worry whether we are rigged to meet that challenge as a collective, be it government, international organizations, or corporates coming together and doing it. What's your view?
So I can start and say that first, during this pandemic, the public-private partnerships have been very, very critical. Working with whether it is the medical sector, working the communications and other sectors, just to ensure that we're able to meet the various demands that were there. So, for instance, once there were no flights and you could not import goods, then you needed to find ways of manufacturing, job losses, all manner of things were happening. So there was a huge coming together of all the different actors, because we had a common enemy that we were working towards defeating, so that even in terms of the priorities of where financing was being put, we were able to come together and quickly say, look, we need to ensure that all the health centers are all connected, all the health centers have access to information, the PPs, and all the other information and services that were required. So in the same way, as we look at now in Kenya, our constitution is very progressive and requires us as government to ensure equal access for everybody. So we've got some very specific tasks that we must do together with the private sector and other non-government actors, including the World Bank and other development partners, so that we ensure there is equal access. Education, for instance, the children were now in their homes, they were not even in the schools. So we needed to rethink that we need to ensure now we have connectivity, not just in the schools, but also in the homes, and that there is access to affordable devices. So new areas, manufacturing locally on devices, which requires involvement of private sector, is also areas where we've really looked at working together. And I would say the new norm is where we are all, I think, putting hands together and solving these problems, whereas before it was sometimes pointing fingers. But right now, I believe the pandemic has allowed us to see what is important. It has highlighted what we need to invest in. We've seen a lot of support from development partners, from the private sector. I mean, I would say, the mobile operators, for instance, reduced their data rates so that everybody in the country was able to now use, their connectivity for work from their homes. So a lot of these have been very, very interesting and very useful. And I think with that working together, we're going to see a lot more progress and growth. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So for
Yeah.
me, yeah, thanks, Joachim. I think this pandemic really showed us the importance of the sector beyond being a very important sector of the economy. So there is so much about the sector as a sector, but as you mentioned in framing your question, this is really showing that it is key to the fabric of the economy, to the fabric of society. And if we take just school, I mean, now it's back to school in many parts of the world. And, many parents did not think that we will be dealing with this 6 months into the pandemic. So the school and the education dimension is very important to the discussion. So we know 1.6, school kids were not able to go to school. And without the connectivity and without the content and without, the possibility to continue learning, there is a big gap. Last week, the bank has issued a human capital index for this year, and the results are sobering in a way. I mean, because of the pandemic, a whole decade of advances in the human capital are threatened to be wiped out. So this is really deep. I really liked how you framed the question. This is deep into the fabric of the society. And without digital, we cannot fast track any recovery. So very important to think about it beyond, a great sector on its own right, to a facilitator, an enabler for every sector of the economy. Today, it's very difficult to imagine any sector that digital does not boost in a way. So I think the discussion, COVID is helping us shift the discussion towards this. It's very clear. Health is another example. Social protection mechanism. Many people, because of COVID, all those in the informal sector, it's very difficult and more difficult for them than others. So how can digital help them cope with the situation? So whatever we look at it, whether at the government level, at the individual level, at the enterprise level, digital is key in these discussions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there, if I may build, there are a few points from a Vodafone perspective, and as you know, we're the number one in Europe, and we're among the top 3 in Africa. I think from our perspective, first, I think COVID forced us to actually rethink what was possible. We broke new grounds on our understanding of what was possible, even starting with ourselves, in the sense that we managed to move all our staff to work from home environment. We have said things in the past could never go at home. Secondly, in terms of what is possible, to your point, Minister, around partnership, we actually established a five-point plan, our COVID contribution, and we drove across all our markets that our starting point was, how do we help governments save lives? And whatever we have to do, we do it. And that started with massive network investment, but also what you refer to as zero rating of educational contents, providing tooling for SMEs so that they wouldn't fall over and go bankrupt, connecting hospitals, giving devices to health staff so that they could also make sure that those who before they were put on ventilators could call their loved ones, because as you know, the death rates of people once you go into the intensive care unit is unfortunately very, very high. So we did all of the things, and we partnered with your government in Kenya, but also many other governments and the World Bank, by the way, on mobility data. So we really tried. My fear here, and this is where I worry a little bit, is the tendency of going back to business as usual. I was heartened by you, Minister, referring to there's a new norm. And I as me personally, but my company really believes that we need to identify the new normal. I don't always sense that, so I agree with you. We should nurture the fact that we came together and actually reformulate what is the role of digital and how do we best drive it. And for me, that implies a number of things. Number one is digital is the cardiovascular system of the economy, which basically means it's no longer a sector thing. So I would worry quite a lot about the return to very sector-specific regulation or sector-specific taxes. That was the way we did things in the past, but it has all these downstream effects or upstream effects that are then negative for everyone. So that's the first one. The second one is because the art of the possible has changed, let us be more bold and creative around what we can change. Let's find the opportunity to break the path we're on. And specifically, I refer to the fact that it's very difficult, for example, to legitimately meet the objective by governments around rural coverage, because the economics of the sector is just not there to do it. So how do we come together and innovate new business models, or for that matter, find leverage fundings from the World Bank, or find other means by which we receive it, but also make sure that we don't extract resources out of a sector that is already having very poor returns on capital if we want them to do more, and which I think it is legitimate to ask this sector to do more. And then, if I may, the third thing that I would encourage, if you want, on this digital journey is to be a bit more blunt around how thinking about it. And I know, Bettina, you have referred to that in a separate conversation you and I had with her. I thought it was a brilliant point around understanding this is an ecosystem. And an ecosystem, in order for it to be nurtured, requires multiple actions. There is no magic wand. There's one aspect around the infrastructure. There's another aspect, like you referred to, Joshua, on the devices. Which you may have the connectivity, but you don't have the usage because people can't afford the devices. There's other elements, which is the demand side. In other words, having the supply of connectivity doesn't work unless you stimulate the demand around SMEs, around public administrations, around public services, or around people's uptake. So I think there is an opportunity for us to think completely fresh and accept that the way we did things in the past is unlikely to accelerate us and allow us to be bold enough for the future, if you want my 5 cents to the issue. But I didn't want to monopolize. I don't know if you have immediate sort of reactions to what I just said.
I think I would add that during this pandemic, one of the things, for me that has come out, standing out is really the young people and their innovations. Within the country, we've seen them, they've been at home and some of them have lost their jobs. And just the way they've looked at this is the problem, this is how we can solve it. And they've come up with the multiple innovations that really we are going to take up and work with. And some of those are way better than some of the things we've been using and implementing. So I think there's a spirit also of innovation that has come out, a spirit of being able, as I was saying, working together, but the young people coming in and saying even we have things that we can contribute. And then, the challenges that we had, because sometimes the borders are closed, you can't move around. Even entertainment, people are using technology for entertainment and they're being paid and they're being able to, entertain, to educate and really still earn a living. So there's been a lot of great things that I will see moving forward. This coming Friday, we're in one of the shopping mall car parks where, the young people have come up with a movie and you just come and drive in, you pay and you watch, driving movies are back. It's no longer just staying at home and, you still have the social distancing in your car. So that innovation has been there. And so if you add that with what you're saying, with what, what we're seeing happening, I think we're going to see a definite new normal going forward. Thank you.
But could I then challenge the two of you on the last, I know we're mindful of time. If I could ask you in 30 seconds each to say, in light of what we just discussed, in light of the opportunity, but also the challenge that we need to collectively overcome and the partnership and the learnings, what would be, in your view, the key thing that your organization could do or could the change it needs to do about for itself in order to be that best partner on this journey? In the case of the World Bank or in the case of a national government, what is the key thing that you come to think about in terms of your own learning and how you should change as an organization to be shepherding this process and making sure that it accelerates even further?
Let me maybe conclude by saying that one of the, when I left Google and came into government, one of the things that worried me and shocked me is how much time we spend in meetings, in traveling, in so many discussions. And really, what this pandemic has been able to allow us to do is to have very efficient meetings, digital meetings. You can take them from home. You don't all have to be in traffic jams. You don't have to pay for so much cost, of taxpayers' money in terms of just and traveling. So we've actually been a lot more productive during this time, even though things have been closed and so on. And I would say we must be able to carry that, what seemed impossible is now possible. We've been able to educate a lot of people and inform them even about the pandemic, ensuring that, explaining things that were difficult is actually being done. So I would just say the ability to be able to just be more efficient and work together using technology. So investing in the right areas is one thing that we must carry. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bettina?
Thank you. I think the main one is to focus on the importance of the ecosystem approach and the importance of looking at both at demand and supply at the same time. So if technology is really a key element and force for driving forward better, we need to tackle the different element of the ecosystem, and we need to do it in parallel. The other thing, it's in terms of prioritization, it's not ICT versus other sectors, is ICT and digital empowering and enabling the other sectors. The last point is the importance of the multidimensional aspects about collaboration, pushing collaboration forward between public and private, creating an environment for the private sector to invest more, creating an environment for deeper collaboration among partners so we don't duplicate efforts, and supporting governments to create this language between the ICT sector and the other sectors of the economy. So it is a crisis not to be put to waste, and it helped us reimagine how we think about development. How do we take this to the next level, working with everybody around the table?
Thank you so much. And I think in that spirit of challenge, collaboration, and ability to stretch and imagine something better for the future, I think there's been a lovely conversation with both of you. We have had a high degree of convergence of thought, but I think that just confirms the massive homework that we need to do now to lock our arms and deliver as one. So thank you very much, Joshua. Thank you, Bettina. I think this has been lovely. And I hand back to our host from Concordia, and thanks to Concordia for giving me this opportunity for this fireside chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim, and thank you to our speakers for that wonderful conversation. As we're listening to all of these, I'm taking some notes to try to bring out some major themes that are coming out of our conversations. And one thing that Joachim mentioned, that COVID allowed us to rethink what was possible, and this idea of a shock to the system to allow us to rethink, I think is something we heard a lot yesterday. I think immediately of our conversation with Merck between Dr. Gerberding and Dame Sally Davies about antimicrobial resistance and, COVID being a lobster dropped in a hot pot that's shocking the system. But all of these underlying issues that have been slowly simmering are now coming to the surface. And I think that metaphor also applies to digital infrastructure and making sure we have the systems necessary to handle this. And so keeping on that same road of digital infrastructure and cooperation, I'm very pleased for our next conversation in partnership with the Digital Impact Alliance around shaping our global future, digital cooperation for SDG impact. We've got a packed house for this conversation, so let's kick it off right away. I'm going to pass it to Kate Wilson, Chief Executive Officer for Digital Impact Alliance, and our esteemed panel. Kate?
Thank you, Kevin. I'm delighted to be here with you all today. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those of you around the world. Digital Impact Alliance is a think, do, replicate tank for digital development cooperation. I'm here today with our panelists to talk to you about shaping our global future, digital cooperation for SDG impact. The potential power of digital technology to transform our world and achieve the SDGs is no longer in question. During this extraordinary year, people all over the world have turned to technology to work, to connect with loved ones, meet their families' needs. And we've seen that the countries best able to respond to and begin to recover from the pandemic are those that are able to use digital technology safely and effectively, not just to track the spread of the virus, but also to provide mobile cash transfers, educate their children, and deliver hundreds of other basic services to their citizens. Learning from these countries all over the world about how they're using digital tools and data responsibly, and getting those stories out so that all of us can build on their lessons. This is crucial if we are to have any chance of achieving the SDGs by 2030. This was already a pressing and hard goal. It is now urgent over the last 9 months. We must act together. One of my favorite sayings, emblazoned on the halls of the Gates Foundation, is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Over the past 4 years at Dial, our most important lesson has been this: we must all work together and learn from one another. If our shared purpose to reach the SDGs, we all have something to learn and something to teach. We must put aside our own priorities and interests to cooperatively support countries to set their own agendas, supporting them to achieve their digital economies. Today, we will learn from some of the organizations Dial has been working closely with since we were founded in 2016, how their leaders are thinking and acting on making digital cooperation a reality. They do this not only in their sectors, health, agriculture, development, climate, education. They're now doing this in digital too. I'm delighted to welcome to our panel 4 distinguished speakers. Assistant Director General Cecilia Sharp from the Swedish International Development Agency, Dr. Axel Klappker from GIZ, supports the German government's development work in countries around the world, Vaijanti Desai from the World Bank, and Liz Klima from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Cecilia, I'd like to start with you first. You've worked in development cooperation for more than 25 years. You've led work on UNICEF's water and climate change. You've worked deeply in development cooperation issues in Sweden, and you spent significant time in Liberia and their policy teams. Could you talk to us about some of CEDA's main priorities and how your own background has helped shape some of the thinking about digital development work, and your experiences and how you see that really changing where we go from here?
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for so nicely introducing me. And I'm really happy to be part of this panel today discussing the digital cooperation and how it can contribute to the SDG agenda. And I tried to give some perspectives from the Swedish development cooperation, and I'm sure it's going to be sprinkled with some of my own experience and thinking as well. I think that all of us during the COVID pandemic have realized, as you said so rightly, the reliance on connectivity and that it has grown exponentially over this time. And living connected has become the new normal for many of us. But of course, as you say, the pandemic has also accentuated the digital divide between those who have and those who don't. And it has exacerbated as well, not only in income inequality, but also inequalities of opportunity and inequalities between men and women, where we see the digital divide actually increasing. And therefore, I think this conversation we're having today comes at a critical time when the world is looking at restarting societies. And the Building Back Better agenda also needs to be greener and a fairer agenda. That is extremely important, particularly when we think about how we are going to invest beyond this crisis response. So not only is the digital agenda a critical piece of the green agenda, it is also important to reach everyone and, of course, leaving no one behind. In restarting, we need to focus on equal use of digital technologies. And for CEDA, an open, free, and secure internet for all is therefore a foundation for our digital work and has been so for a while. And we have been engaged in working with digital for quite a long time, but we work at multiple levels and different strands in addressing digital divide, from grassroots levels and implementation to global norms and policies. We work with private sector to civil society, and including multilateral organizations. One, the World Bank is one of our new partners again on digital particularly. And in doing this, we always apply a human rights-based approach, ensure that we realize and try to realize everybody's rights. I think in our collaboration or cooperation, we use three main approaches to the digital development that has been carved out over the years. And the first one is that we target specific groups or specific issues through the partnerships and programs that we have together with our partners. And in those, of high priority is our partnerships, which is focusing women's access to technology and to support particularly smart female technology entrepreneurs. High on the agenda is also to work in partnerships that are addressing gender-based violence. And we do this to create safe spaces online for women and girls. The second approach is that we build on what we have learned in good digital development practices and governance. And in doing so, we ask all our partners to work along the adopted principles of digital development. And I hope, Kate, that you are happy to hear that those principles are really, really important to us. They are a core pillar. And particularly the part which is building on existing ecosystems and designing together with users. And I think these are part of the development effectiveness agenda, which is so much at the core or need to be part of the core of how we work. The third part of our collaboration or pillar is that we see the power of facilitating a dialogue between partners. So really push agendas through linking partners together. And one example of how we're doing this is through the Stockholm Internet Forum that we organize. And the Stockholm Internet Forum, I'd like to stress, is an inclusive international forum and platform for in-depth dialogue and discussions on how a free, open, and secure internet can promote sustainable development and equal access to digitals worldwide. And this conversation will continue during the SIF, which we call it, the Stockholm Internet Forum 2021, which will be, of course, purely online. Just to conclude, we are happy to see that there is a momentum right for further the digital agenda, and that the global development actors right now respond to the need to work smarter with digital development solutions. And we all see that there are more digital cooperation, digital transformation strategies emerging, and that more partners and donors have digital as a priority. And that's, of course, why you so rightly say, Kate, we need to figure out how do we work smarter together now, because this really creates opportunities for us to forge partnerships and particularly look at the added value and ensure that we all feel pieces of the puzzle, because we all bring something to the table, but we need to avoid overlaps, of course, in programming, particularly at the bilateral level in countries. And this is also why SIDA newly adopted an own digital strategy earlier this year, which will help to guide our journey. And we realize that we have a lot of job to do ahead of us, which is including a transformation of our own culture and knowledge to ensure that both digital opportunities but also the challenges are properly addressed. So in conclusion, the digital transformation that I see can only be achieved through good development effectiveness, including working together in partnerships, as you rightly said, with national governments and other actors. And it needs to be based on inclusive national policies and supporting priorities aiming at digital transformation across sectors, including health and education and so on. And it needs to look at the whole of society. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Klappacher, Axel, would you mind commenting some on how the German government views, the critical issues of digital cooperation and sort of commenting and building on Cecilia's comments around cooperation and sort of the future working with countries?
Kate, thank you very much for the kind introduction and the question. And I'm really happy to be here and thank you for inviting us. I think Cecilia has already mentioned many of the general aspects, and I think she has clearly outlined the importance of digitalization to development cooperation. Of course, we see also the huge potential to increase efficiency of development cooperation through digitalization, through digital approaches. Of course, we see good possibilities to promote transparency and justice and to support this with digital means and digital programs. And of course, we also see the huge potential of digitalization in economic terms to boost productivity and to really work together with countries to develop their economic sectors. I think from our point of view, besides those issues directly to do with development cooperation, we also see a broader role of digitalization in our portfolio in terms of data sovereignty. We see that countries want to cooperate and we also try to develop joint programs with them to increase their capacity to develop a mechanism and institutions to govern their data properly and really to do this in a sovereign matter, which is an issue, I think, very high on our agenda. Let me just give you a few examples of what we have currently in the pipeline, because this year, of course, for German organizations, I think the very fact that we are having the EU-German the Germans hold the EU presidency this year has a bearing on what we are conceiving and what we are having in the pipeline, what we are trying to bring forward. I think we conceive our digital approaches these days very much in the broader context of the European-African digital partnerships. And under our EU Council presidency, we are trying to launch and push forward three main initiatives, three main flagships. Let me just say a few words about those three flagships. First, the first main flagship we are trying to support is the D4D, the Digital for Development Hub, which I think is a very important initiative together with the European Commission and many other European partners, a main vehicle for operationalizing what we call a Team Europe approach and joint programming and joint implementing of different European development partners with a very ambitious budget. I think this is a very good example of a coordinated response of EU member states to foster human-centric and green digital transformation in our partner countries. And this approach, the D4D Hub, aims to support and coordinate European interventions and will also help build digital public-private partnerships with European and also African companies. The second flagship is the EU-African Union Data Flagship, aiming to create a partnership with Africa on data. That's an issue I have already mentioned that will secure both continents' digital sovereignty and foster a fair and inclusive data economy. And flagship 3 is the African European Digital Innovation Bridge. Here more focusing on the innovation and economic potential of the digital transformation. This flagship will promote digital entrepreneurship and connect Europe's and Africans' digital innovation ecosystems. I don't want to go into the details right now, because I think there is maybe time for discussion a little bit later. I think what is important to us in terms of coordination, I have said that we really see this topic very much in the European context. This is one, but we also see it from the perspective of our partner countries. I think coordination ought to be owned by our partner governments, and we really should see it as a country-led question. And we see, of course, our partner countries in the driver's seat. Thank you.
Thank you, Axel. I appreciate it. Vaijanti, I know that the bank has spent quite a bit of time working with country clients, looking at both core infrastructure of connectivity, as well as so many of the critical programs that you're leading a lot of the collaboration on around digital identity, working with groups on financial services and digital cash transfers. securing data. Could you talk a little bit about how the programs at the bank are really coming together and how you're working both with clients as well as with partner governments and donors to really bring together digital cooperation and unleash it?
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. And it's wonderful to be on this panel. And as you mentioned at the beginning, COVID-19 has really tested the ability of governments to effectively provide social assistance and the relief packages to those impacted economically. And we've seen unprecedented scale. 200 countries have deployed social protection measures to over 1 billion people who many had never previously received such social assistance or cash transfers in countries like Argentina and Peru and Pakistan, about a third of the population. In Philippines, approximately 80% of its population receiving these social assistance. And what we've also seen is that many countries have struggled to reach this new poor, many who are in the informal sector, not previously covered by established social protection programs. And what we've seen is the quarantine and social distancing have really accelerated the demand for governments to provide payments and a whole range of services remotely, and also to ensure that the woman or the member of the household intended to receive these benefits are really ensuring that it gets to her hands or into her account. Although ID for D and government to person payments have been development agendas for some time, some years, COVID-19 has really magnified the importance of these digital public infrastructure, sort of a shared infrastructure. Obviously, underpinning all of this is the importance of internet access for all, good data governance and data protection. But these digital public infrastructure, which is ID, payments, data interoperability, ensuring, for example, data interoperability linked to things like social registries, really, these 3-4 layers really provide a powerful stack that we know has unlocked digital economies in the way that roads and railways really did for traditional economies. And we call it rails or these horizontals because it sort of cuts across multiple use cases and are sector agnostic. The World Bank Group has been, as you say, working on this agenda with a number of partners. So on the Digital Development Partnership, with now over 10 donors coming together, working on internet access for all, broader mainstreaming of digital. And on the programs and the initiatives that I've been working on, ID for D and G2PX, which is more recently launched, there's also really shaping the agenda both internally in the World Bank Group across different sector silos that may exist, whether it's bringing together the social protection teams, the digital development teams, the financial sector teams, governance teams, health teams, a whole range on a shared platform, but also with the donor partners and most importantly, working with country clients who really are beginning to aspire to build some of these core digital public infrastructure platforms.
Thank you, Vajanti. Liz, I wanted to ask for your perspective from the context of the Gates Foundation. I know that you all are tackling this both at a sectoral level as well as looking at thinking about how you can better support countries. Could you talk a little bit about how your efforts are being used to invest in digital cooperation and what you really see as what we can all do differently to really position ourselves for the future?
Yeah, well, thank you, Kate, for the question, and to Dial and Concordia for inviting me to join today. Thrilled to be part of such an esteemed group of panelists on an important issue. I want to first emphasize what the other panelists have said about the transformative power of digital. A relatively modest investment in public digital infrastructure has the potential to unlock dividends for society. But I think we're all recognizing that even the combined investment of donors, countries, private sector isn't maximizing the return on that investment because of the fragmented nature of our investing. World over, the COVID response has sparked new investment and policy change that's enabled digitalization to improve disease surveillance, to innovate new health service delivery models, to deliver social protection. as Vajayanti mentioned, proving the power of digital, India, which already had invested in a world-class digital identity and payment system, was able to transfer cash to 200 million women almost immediately when the crisis hit. And at the same time, across the states and union territories of India, there were over 90 digital platforms and applications that emerged, some funded directly by government, some pro bono, some from private sector, some supported by various donors. And while it was great to see such a swift response across the board, as you'd guess, it resulted in duplication of efforts and now questions about the sustainability and interoperability. And so while these are unprecedented times, it still pushes me to reflect that had there been a dedicated platform locally for a donor community to align their efforts, we may have achieved a coordinated effort that was effective both for the near-term acute need and effective in building towards longer-term system strengthening. I think we risk verticalizing COVID as opposed to using the crisis as an opportunity to strengthen the overall primary healthcare system and whole of government. We talk a lot, we use the phrase rebuilding systems after COVID, but rebuilding risks sounding like propping up surface structures again without laying the foundation that was missing in the first place. So we really, at the Gates Foundation, hope that this can be an inflection point for partners to invest. At the country level, I want to underline the importance of being country-led, and that means investing behind a country-owned vision for digital transformation, but also, as I mentioned before, having in place a governance structure that supports that vision. And just as an example, in Ethiopia, when the Federal Ministry of Health put forward a 5-year health sector transformation plan, it included digital revolution. And together, the Gates Foundation, USAID, Global Fund, and the Doris Duke Foundation consolidated funding and established a data use partnership. Each donor with discrete roles in understanding how data was used, investigating health impacts, but a coordinated effort on the ground. And today, the term data use partnership in Ethiopia has become synonymous with donor coordination, I'm happy to say. At the global level, I think we lack a common platform for donor resource mobilization. And without this, progress in digital development will remain slow. Take the analogy of Gavi. In the late 20th century, Gavi was established because vaccination rates were plateauing and children were dying because they didn't have access to existing vaccines. Gavi's unique contribution was bringing together the best of what UN agencies, governments, industry, donors, civil society had to offer, integrating those into a common platform. And this pooling effort yielded multiple benefits. Donors could cut a single check. Low-income countries could turn to one place versus navigating the thicket of competing programs. And Gavi used advanced market commitments to aggregate demand for vaccines. So you could argue digital development is in a similar place that vaccination was 20 years ago. So I've many lessons that the foundation's learned from its mistakes and successes in investing in digital for development, but I'll leave it there for now. But in sum, it's not always straightforward, but we see the necessity for alignment and collaboration, and the foundation really looks forward to working with Dial 2.0 in this direction. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you all so much. I'd love to spend all afternoon talking to you. Unfortunately, I think we were called, but I just want to quickly summarize. So I really hear from you, Cecilia, and from Sita, like we need to put women at the center and then make sure that we're building back for a greener, better future and building back together. I love the concept of Team Europe and how Team Europe can actually begin to bring together, but I think we expand that and make that Team the World of how we actually put countries at the center to chart their own digital cooperation futures, and the rest of us line up to help with support. The World Bank emphasized the critical things that they're already leading and the rails that actually exist that we all can learn and build from, as well as seeing the examples of different countries that are in place. And we have a number of countries from Ethiopia to India to Rwanda to Singapore to Senegal to others, where we can learn how is everyone taking their own and charting their own digital transformation journey forward, and our need for greater cooperation on digitally at the national level, and marshaling all of the global resources to bear. I want to thank all of you for just a wonderful panel and for sharing your time and insights with this group today. You left us a lot to think about and a lot to go do. And so I look forward to us all working on this together from here.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you to all of our panelists. You know, that is part one of the conversations we're having with Dial. If you tune in to the Strategic Dialogue, Whole of Society Agenda, Global Cooperation for National Digital Transformation, you can hear part two of our programming partnership with Dial. That's coming up here at 10:45 Eastern. You can check it on your agendas. You know, as we transition, I wanted to take a quick moment to thank our principal sponsor, Uber. Thanks to Uber's generous sponsorship, we were able to open up this summit to a much larger audience and fulfill our commitment to being a truly inclusive platform. So please make sure to stop by the Uber sponsor booth on the sponsors and partners page throughout the summit to learn more about Uber's latest initiatives on all things urban mobility and the gig economy, network with Uber representatives, and more. So thank you to Uber for your continued support. And now on to our final conversation for this morning's main stage block. In partnership with the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or the DFC, please welcome for a conversation around the future of development finance, Edward Burrier, Executive Vice President of Strategy at the DFC, and Julia LaRoche, reporter for Yahoo Finance. Julia?
Thank you so much, Kevin. And I'm pleased to bring in Edward Burrier, the Executive Vice President for Strategy for the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. It's actually the newest agency. And Edward, I'm sure some folks know about the DFC who are watching, but I think it would be really helpful for us to frame up the conversation by talking about the agency and the origins of it and its mission.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. And I really appreciate the focus on DFC because I'm so excited about the work that we're doing here and the impact. But as you said, a lot of people don't know about us yet. We opened up our doors earlier this year on January 1st of 2020. We actually evolved from a previous government agency called the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. Congress passed legislation in October 2018 that expanded OPIC, gave it more investment tools, raised its lending cap, and incorporated a portion of USAID, which had a small lending program, into one agency. So we're bigger, we've got more investment tools to work with, and we hope to have more impact across the developing world.
And I know you were instrumental in that piece of legislation, the BUILD Act, and it was bipartisan, which seems pretty rare these days. And I was hoping we could just dig a bit further into the mission and why it was so important to form this new agency. Walk us through kind of what's going on in the landscape. I know a lot of folks kind of view this as a counter to what China's been doing, specifically with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and some of their efforts abroad. Talk to us a bit more about why this is so important and why it was such a bipartisan movement.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And we are very proud of the bipartisan support that we did achieve for the proposal to create DFC. We, at our heart under OPIC, it's development finance. So we have lending tools, we can give loans, we can give political risk insurance. And with the BUILD Act, which created DFC, they gave us more tools. We can now do equity investments, and we can also do technical assistance. So we may do some small feasibility studies that gets a project investment ready. And I think what Congress recognized, working with the administration, was that across the developing world, just our competitors were outgunning us. We didn't have the full suite of investment tools at our disposal. And so Congress gave us more firepower and more tools so that we could invest in the developing world. Obviously, China was very much on the minds of the members as the BUILD Act was moving through. Our model is completely different. We work with the private sector. We are working to ensure that our projects are up to high standards. They use local labor, and they aren't loading the governments up with debt. And I think what you see across the developing world is you'll see the Chinese, they will come in, they'll promise the moon, they'll load the government up with debt, and when they can't pay it back, they'll seize the asset. There was the port in Sri Lanka, which caught many members' attention and really helped focus Congress and the administration on the need for us to step up our game with the DFC.
Yeah, it's a good point that you bring up. Let's talk about the work that the DFC has been doing, even the reception abroad, how that's going. I think you would probably have a very interesting pulse as to, how America is perceived abroad and the work that you all are doing in these various areas. Walk us through what you're kind of seeing on the ground so far.
Yeah, no, great. I think I'm tremendously proud and enthusiastic about the work that we're doing. We are covering the gamut. We just had 2 weeks ago a board meeting where it was very impressive. It was one of our largest board meetings we've ever had, even including the past OPIC historical examples. But it was everything from a $1 million equity investment into a tech platform in East Africa that's going to help get goods to low-income families in East Africa, all the way up to $1.5 billion in political risk insurance that's going to help develop the Rovuma natural gas fields off the coast of Mozambique, which promises to absolutely transform this country, one of the poorest countries on earth. And so everywhere that we have gone, people say, "Where have you been?" And whereas we haven't had a choice but to take these loans from authoritarian regimes, and so we are finding a very welcome reception everywhere we go. And these investments that we do, I think it's important to note, these are things in the developing world that the private sector would not do on their own. So that is where we're stepping in. It's a void that has to be filled. It wouldn't happen without us. And what we're really looking for is the development impact that they'll have. We want to have these investments because they will be, when we look at things through a financial lens, we're not like our sister agency that gives grants. And the reason why we spend so much time looking at the business plans and the credit of the organization that we're going to invest in is because we want it to be long-lasting, sustainable over the long haul. That financial return, we don't think that we're going to balance the budget off of that, but it's a symptom of the viability of these projects, and so that they're going to be there over the long haul and long lasting and have that development impact that we're seeking.
You just gave a couple of examples of, what the investments might look like. Any early success stories that you can share with us, and what some of the kind of knock-on ripple effects of those investments might be?
Sure. Well, I mentioned earlier, Julia, that one of the big innovations of DFC was that we now have the ability to make equity investments. And so one of our very first equity investments was in a company called Fresh to Home in India. And what it does is works with the local fishermen to get their goods to market. India has a very fractured value chain of middlemen that takes many different steps to get from the local fisherman to the consumer. And this company, Fresh to Home, breaks down those barriers, and it's getting it directly, again, from that fisherman, the local farmer, out to consumers. I wish there was something similar here in Washington, D.C. But this is an example of a company that's going to have a transformative impact on the Indian market, and it's something where it's pre-revenue. It couldn't have taken on a loan. The equity was the only tool that we had to be able to invest in them so that they can bolster up their services, have the development impact. And again, it was just too early for them to take on more debt. Many of these cases, these companies in the developing world, they need to be investing that into the company. So that's a great example of one of our earliest equity investments that I think is going to have a really big impact.
How do you assess, and how do you kind of discern where you might want to make an investment? Do you all have some sort of process that you go through?
We do. I think another kind of uh, um, innovation from the Build Act that I think is important for everyone to understand is that under OPIC, we did have a limited set of things that we could invest in. And we like to think that, say, the Build Act gave us a lot more flexibility. So I put it this way, it's a paradigm shift. Under OPIC, when someone walked in the door, it was, can we check enough boxes to make the investment? Can we do this? Now, with the flexibilities that we have, the aperture is much wider. So it's, should we make this investment? And so that is where the development impact comes into play. And we, over the past several months, have rolled out our IQ system, which is called the impact quotient. And this is how we look at certain investments through this impact lens. And many investors across the world have been trying to crack the code on this. So I'm very proud of the system that we've set up. And it's going to be very iterative, and we're going to keep learning from it. But we look at the different types of jobs that it's going to produce, the segment of the economy that it impacts, that that country may or may not have already. Looks at inclusivity of the investment. And so that is how our kind of internal guide of a scoring system, so to speak, that helps guide us to, again, that paradigm shift of, should we make this investment?
Yeah, I hear you definitely on the impact quotient. Fascinating thing. It was something that stood out to me. We're, of course, everybody knows we're in the middle of a global pandemic. And I was wondering how that's kind of shifting the mission of the DFC, or changing where you might want to allocate or make investments. What are some of the challenges and opportunities that you're seeing maybe in the medium to long term here?
Sure. No, great question. I mean, we definitely have seen our work change, and we've had to change our strategy a bit over the past several months. I think what we'll see in the developing world is a lot of our kind of greenfield, maybe power projects get put on the back burner a little bit while demand falls off for a bit and these economies decline. But we are going to need to be, we are the ultimate countercyclical. We are the ones, when capital is fleeing these markets, we're the ones that rush towards it. And so one of the things that we've done to change our strategy a little bit is we're working more with the local financial institutions. In many cases, we worked with them in the past, but we're going to double down with them to make them a loan so that they can then on loan to these small and medium enterprises that, much like our country here at home, these small businesses are going to be what are driving these economies forward. And so we're doing, I think what you'll see from us and what we've seen over the past several months, and I think going forward, is, again, less of kind of these new infrastructure projects and a lot more of this on lending. Hopefully we can turn the corner as quickly as possible. And I'm hopeful that the dim prospects that we all read about aren't true, and that we are going to be able to turn this corner as soon as possible. But until then, we're going to be have our foot on the gas and pressing forward as much as we can.
What do you think has been one of the most valuable or biggest insights or biggest lessons that you've taken away so far from the pandemic?
Well, gosh, there's so many different lessons just from one, internally here, just from a management perspective, working with the staff here and just the challenges that's had been. And I'm tremendously proud of we've had record the past 2 quarters, and that's with everyone on telework basis, which is a tremendously challenging. But I think the lesson that I've learned is, in the developing world, these markets where we work, they just do not have the tools that we have. And we are very fortunate that here at home that, we've got our Treasury, we've got our Fed, we've got these tools that we're working, and these developing countries just don't have those. And so that is why, I think we should always be overestimating what we need to do as far as the numbers that we see, because I think one of the lessons that I talked to several from that lived through the 2008 is that they always underestimated the impact, and so I think we always need to be striving as far and as large as we can.
I do want to kind of shift topics because one of the recent pieces of news involving the DFC was, of course, the news of the peace highway between Serbia and Kosovo. I was wondering if you could talk to us about that and kind of how you see the DFC kind of aiding in diplomacy and those sorts of things.
Yeah, no, great question. And, this at its heart gets back to what I was saying about that paradigm shift. And now with a little bit more flexibility, I think what we're finding, and certainly the intent, is that DFC can fit more into our U.S. policy priorities than we could in the past. And so you've raised a great example of, Serbia and Kosovo came together over the past several weeks and at the White House a few weeks ago, signed an economic agreement. It wasn't a political agreement. It was an economic integration agreement. And what was critical to that was DFC working with our colleagues at Exim Bank and the other financial tools that we have in the United States government coming together to say that we would back these investments that would help spur economic interconnectivity between the countries. And so there's a highway that we would like to finance. There's railways. There's other small and medium enterprise lending that we'd like to do. But this is the lesson. My old boss used to quote an axiom that when goods cross borders, armies don't. And Kosovo and Serbia for a long time, obviously, we all know the history there, and they still have been stuck on not being able to getting to political recognition and all those things. And I'll give my colleagues a lot of credit. They kind of flipped the cart and said, let's just focus on the economic interconnectivity first, and then that other stuff, the other political agreements will come over time. And so that's the focus, that's the tools that we're able to bring to the table in a situation like that I think can really have long-lasting impact.
Yeah, I definitely hear you on that, on the longer term impact and the ripple effects ultimately. Edward Burrier, Executive Vice President of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Thank you so much for joining me for this fireside chat.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Julia, for that wonderful conversation. That brings us to the end of our morning main stage conversations this morning, but there is plenty more to come today, both on the main stage and on all of our different formats. I wanted to take a quick moment before we close to thank our corporate sponsor, Boston Consulting Group. BCG has helped us elevate a particularly critical programming area on the role of finance in building a more equitable and inclusive society and shaping the recovery through the lens of diversity, inclusivity, and access to capital. Their strategic dialogue on the role of finance in building a more equitable and inclusive society just kicked off, so I encourage you to head over there or head over to our strategic dialogue in partnership with Dial on national digital infrastructure, and we will see you back here at 1 p.m. Eastern on the main stage for a powerhouse lineup that includes Barbara Humpton, David Rubenstein, Brad Smith, and Jim Lowry. See you soon.